This is Steve Ambrose. He's a noise control engineer from Maine who's joining us here today in Falmouth to talk about his experience and knowledge about wind turbine noise health effects and his own personal experience. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
You're how old?
I'm 64 years old.
Okay.
Been doing this for about 35 plus years. I got a degree in civil engineering after spending 4 years in the Coast Guard, and where I flew on helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. So I have I'm prone to motion sickness as by experience. What I first joined doing noise control was with Stone & Webster Engineering, where after a few years I met Rob when he joined the company, Rob Rand, and our primary responsibility was working to properly site and noise control power plants. And this would be coal-fired, oil-fired, gas-fired, nuclear power plants. And one of my first projects was working to site a very large hydro dam. Never came to be, so didn't get very far with that one. But I learned a lot by doing. I've come up through the College of Experience, learning and understanding acoustics, noise control, and environmental sound. I'm fascinated by it. I really appreciate interacting with people, because that's probably why I joined the Coast Guard, do something beneficial. Noise control of industrial sources is so critical for the public welfare, and you want to end up working with your client, advise him that in order for him to be a good neighbor, he has to control his noise so that the neighbors don't complain. And a lot of times they look at me when I said, well, I got to go out to your property line where your nearest neighbor is and look in at you. This will be for an existing power plant. And he says, well, I don't want you to represent the interests of my neighbor. And I go, if I end up looking at you and seeing and listening to what you produce for noise, I can help you make corrections if you need them, so you'll be a good acoustic neighbor. And when you're a good acoustic neighbor, you will not be having your lawyers dealing with the neighbor's lawyers. And that just is a long effort and frustration, and no one comes out happy or financially to the better. So he goes, okay, get out there and listen. And so I've learned to be a very good listener and have a God-given ability to be able to walk around large noise sources and imprint the sound, the acoustic signature of various noise sources. Not all the times, but quite often I can go out to the property line and listen. And I go, oh, that's that vent blower up on the boiler house roof. Or that's the ID fan.
Wow.
Or that is the force-draft fan. And what it does, it enables you to be very acoustic signature sensitive. And when I went out and visited a wind turbine for the first time, I listened to it and I go, you can hear the air just being sheared off the trailing edge of those blades. And you can hear the energy being released by the blade tip as the blades turn around. And to realize that those blades are spinning at tip speeds of 200 miles an hour, or close to it. Well, that brings back the days when I was in the Coast Guard listening to the rotors on helicopters. Same type of sound coming off them. And you look at the blades, and they've been designed to try to minimize stresses and blade tip energy being generated at the tip. That's why they go to a very tight tapered tip. But there is still, it's such a long blade that you have the velocity on there to impart an awful lot of energy into the air. And that energy drifts down with the wind. And it also generates noise. It's acoustic energy when it comes. And people are complaining about the acoustic energy. But is that all they're complaining about? My experience being down here in Falmouth last spring with Rob, I think it was Patriots Day weekend. Windy day, we had chosen that day. We've been waiting in Maine to go down and do a study that was funded by a private individual who was very concerned about why people were complaining about noise. And we came down on the windy day, strong westerly winds, front had passed through, and you could see the turbine turning, you could hear them, and the winds were so strong that the Falmouth Wind 1 was in curtailment. And that was mandated by the town when the winds got above 10 meters per second at the hub height. Notice, which is the privately owned Webb turbine, does not have a curtailment. And so that turbine was operating. Well, we met with an individual who introduced us to neighbors around the area. And we found this, we introduced the first time to this one family that said, well, why don't you study it here? And for me, it was nice because it was a single floor house. It enabled me to move around quite easily because I have very limited mobility due to muscular dystrophy. And we emptied the car, put the equipment in. They told us to set up in the dining room. I set up on the dining room table. Rob set up on another table his instruments. I usually like to talk to people to understand them. What are they hearing? What bothers them? How do they feel? And we both arrived very enthusiastically. And Rob, being such the, oh, I don't want to disparage him, he's a techie. He's hands-on. He loves working with computers, instruments, and crunching data. He was setting up his instruments. And I'm kind of just moving around, getting later, and I have fewer instruments with me. Rob was going to be using a computer. I was just going to be using a sound meter at first. And my enthusiasm just died away for the job, for here. Coming down, you're all excited about, here's something to do. It was dying away. And finally, I sat down at the dining room table and started to work with my instruments. And I noticed I had a headache. I said, well, I had a long drive down. I'm dehydrating. So the lady of the house gave me some water. So I drank it, thinking that that would clear the headache up. Seemed to have very little effect, but I continued to work on. And Rob and I interacted a bit, and it seemed like he was under the weather a bit. And we just were kind of in a frump. The enthusiasm, just gone. And what's going on? I ended up, oh, this lady, she's deadly. She has munchies. And so I would munch on the Easter candy. And I wasn't getting any satisfaction, and my stomach felt queasy. I go, oh, this is awful. So now I'm not hungry. I'm drinking water, and I'm getting waterlogged. My headache is just getting worse. And I go, what's going on? So continue to work through it, thinking, well, maybe I'm coming down with the flu. It's springtime and it's warm weather. And I go to set my instrument up, calibrate it. I go through the motions, and I get my calibration offset. I put it in. I said, okay, now I'm going to check it. Put the calibrator back on. I'm still off. I do it again and again. Must have done it 5 or 6 times. I said, well, I have to pull out the manual. Well, I have a little shortcut manual. I pulled it out. I was hitting the wrong button. But I've hit the right button hundreds of times before. So I just think, huh. And we're just in a funk trying to collect our data. The homeowner was gracious enough. They brought food into us. And I could not eat half of the food. I just felt nauseous. And for me not to eat food, I don't have that problem. And I felt bad. We continued on working with the data. We set our instruments up. We're watching computer screens. I got my computer out and watching numbers and measuring. And it just doesn't seem to be the sound level that you need to be upset in that house. We couldn't hear the wind turbines. You could sense something was going on outside with the wind, but that house was so well made that it had highly insulated walls, thick walls, and very efficient thermal windows. And we just couldn't get a start on getting a handle on the data. And finally, we said we're going to go out when the traffic dies down and measure wind turbines outdoors. So at midnight, we packed our gear up and went out, and we took 3 measurements around the industrial park. And the wind was dying, continuously dying, just dropping off, dropping off, dropping off. And finally, we got to the last location, our third one. It started to rain. We got our measurements, and we packed up and went back to the house. And we went back, and the people had us stay with them. They said, "You sleep in our rooms. We're going elsewhere." Mm-hmm. Now, this kind of stunned me for a second time, because Rob and I had done research up in Mars Hill in Maine. We were invited up by one family, and we ended up staying in another person's house, and they left. And I go, what's with these wind turbines where people will have all their worldly possessions in their home, invite strangers in, and then leave? What's going on? I mean, it just keeps adding to the evidence that there's something about wind turbine sites that cause people to do unusual acts on that. And it's went to sleep that night, slept pretty good. For me in a strange method, we slept through the night. Next morning we got up and the wind was light. We went out and we got breakfast. And while we're at breakfast, I told Rob, I said, "Oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit better." And we're 6-7 miles away. And drinking coffee. I said, "Boy, this coffee tastes good." And we got breakfast, and breakfast is always a refreshing meal. You break from fasting. So it was enjoyable. And I felt, let's go back and get our data. We go back, we get in that house, boom. Mm-hmm. Enthusiasm is gone. And we measure sound levels, and they don't make sense. Remember, we've each been doing this over 30 years. We've gone to many neighbors' houses. We've been in many communities, and not a single time have we ever been flummoxed in the ability to get data or feel ill for no apparent reason. And I just keep scratching my head. And I said, this is why we're out here. This is why we do our research, is to try to help the public live with noise sources. But this is one noise source I can't relate the noise to causing problems. And so Rob and I, we carry on conversations. Mm-hmm. And we ended up, what else could it be? What else do wind turbines do? And I keep thinking back to my helicopter days, the air coming off the blades. What's the blades doing? Well, that's quite an interruption in the air. Mm-hmm. And is it causing something that's acoustic related, but maybe non-acoustic, causing people to feel upset? And I go, ooh. I remember sitting at a desk with a Loran set in front of me. It was the old-fashioned Loran sets. When I was flying an aircraft, doing with the Coast Guard, search and rescue, and you had to look into like an oscilloscope screen mm-hmm. to line up your signals. And you have a chart down underneath you. Mm-hmm. And you navigate by lining up signals. I went, when did I feel the same way when I was sitting at this home looking at my computer screen, reading a report mm-hmm. in front of me? What is in that airplane? What was different in that airplane than at this table. The plane was bouncing around, and I was suffering motion sickness. I'm sitting still in a dining room chair, motion sick, just as I was in that airplane. But I'm stationary. Well, now you're out of my realm, I'm not a doctor. But that gave me a clue as to where things may be coming. And you being the doctor, this is an opportunity for you to speak.
I'm going to keep asking you questions.
Yeah,
So you did get.
You asked me what?
So you did get motion sick with the fixed wing aircraft and the helicopters.
Yes.
In the past.
Yep.
Cars.
And I couldn't eat.
And you couldn't eat at those times.
Yeah.
And that was the same this time too.
Same way. Yeah.
And you said you had a headache with this as well?
First onset was a sign of a headache.
Okay.
And then the next one was nausea. And then I felt a little dizzy, a little uneasy, kind of apprehension. Since I wasn't into this job, I had a strong desire to leave or to go outside. It was like my body telling me, go to a safer place. But I go, I'm in a house, and what is this? And I said, I'm here to do acoustic measurements. So you focus on acoustic measurements. But when I keep looking back on it, and this was just days after returning home, I go, what just happened? And it was kind of eye-opening. I mean, the fact that you can be so debilitated that you lose all desire to complete your normal tasks. I mean, I'm an investigator, and I work with computers, I work with instruments, I've worked in moving vehicles and stuff. I've never had this problem sitting still in a house, and I'm looking at data that acoustically tells me there's no problem. But then I'm feeling and I'm sensing low frequency with my instruments. There may be a problem here. And it's got to be just a puzzle. It's a real puzzle. But you go around in a frump. I just remember at times just getting up and walking around the room. There's something different to do, just see if I get relief. And I never did on that. I've stared at that computer screen, and it's a series of lines that move up and down, and they're measuring octave bands, but I have the ability to go all the way down to 1 hertz, very low frequencies, and I watched this 2 hertz, 4 hertz energy going up and down, and it doesn't relate to the A-weighted sound level at all. It's moving totally independent from the A-weighted. And I go, what is this energy that's down here that's not audible? And
so the A-weighted was also fluctuating, but not...
But not fluctuating, not in rhythm.
Wow.
On that. And so it just goes, is it related? Is it unrelated? It's have we got 2 mechanisms here going on? And Rob and I are continuing our research to try to answer that question. But it reveals some very interesting information that we may end up having 2 problems here, or 2 indications. Rob introduced me to a term that's very appropriate, proxy. Measuring A-weighted sound levels is kind of a proxy to indicate a level at which, when an A-weighted sound level gets so high, it may be indicative of the presence of low frequencies. And this goes back to the Pedersen and Way studies, where they did surveys. They interviewed people, how they felt and all that, and they related it to sound levels. And it turns out the starting point where people start feeling uneasy is 33, 32, 35 dBA in there. And then it ramps up. More and more people become the greater part of the population. So can we end up using something like 35 dBA as an indicator that if you have wind turbine noise at 35 dBA, the potential exists that you're going to have sufficient low frequency energy to cause these physiological adverse health impacts on that, and it's just a proxy. They're linked, but it's independent of one another in some respect. But
did you have any past history of headache before?
when I'm dehydrated, I have headaches.
Okay.
It comes on. I drink water, it goes away.
Wow.
On that, and sometimes I need to use aspirin, but 9 times out of 10, it's water.
And when you were younger, or at any time, have you had a migraine headache?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No, oh no.
Obviously, this wasn't related to your sleep coming in to this. You said you had some dizziness?
Dizziness, yeah. I had to be very careful with my muscular dystrophy.
Yes.
I walk like a weeble, a teeter-totter, because I have no leg strength. And so I have to make sure I can plant my foot flat on the floor, that it's even, and because I have no strength to compensate if something gives way. I drop like a rock. And they go, "Where are you, Steve?" And then I'm stuck. So I'm very conscious of my environment in that respect. And I try not to get myself in a situation where I need a pickup to get out of it. So, but I used to be, I mean, this is late onset. It's gotten bad when I got in my 50s. It got progressively worse in 55 and 60. And now it's gotten to the point where it's really hindering me a lot.
So did you notice any unsteadiness or more difficulty when you had
I
these
noticed I was
symptoms?
more cautious when I would get up, make sure that I was standing, and then walk off. I wouldn't just get up in a smooth movement and go into a stride. Now I really got up, very careful. And the other thing I do now is I stand up, and if I want to go in that direction, I do a stationary turn, and then move in that direction. I won't do the standard, walk away turn. So I'm a very stop and go person now.
So,
But
and
I
this
found
is,
I was very sensitive to it at this house on that.
you're very sensitive to having to do these things?
I was very sensitive that I needed to do that.
Okay.
At home, I don't need to do it so much. It's familiar territory. I know where things are, where I can brace against and all that. But this house was a wide open house. It had no clutter. It just was easy to go around. But when I would change my attitude from sitting to standing, I just made sure I was ready before I stepped off.
Did you notice anything in your ears during
No.
this experience? Did you have any ringing in your ears?
No ringing.
No pressure?
No pressure.
Pain? Any other body sensations like pressure, vibration, anywhere?
No. It was the weirdest feeling to be, as I could be motion sick and be stationary. I mean, because I've been jostled around in the seat of an aircraft, and for hours, just fighting off motion sickness. And that they used to joke in the service until I discovered cinnamon candy that we ought to give Steve an airsick bag with a clear bottom so he can navigate while he's sick. That's a grim description, but they used to joke about that. And, the cinnamon candy solved that, but
Wow.
this one, and I don't know what the reasoning for that was, other than you're always working your tongue and your jaw,
Yeah, I
whether
don't
it's
know
balancing. I don't know, but it was, my stomach was sweetened, and it worked for other people. But I don't think it's a solution for this wind turbine issue at all, because it seems to start in the head and then go through the body. The body responds, because the onset of the headache was the first indication that something was happening.
So then where did it go in the body?
The nausea, you get the feeling of
Oh, right,
you don't want to
okay.
eat and anything like that. It just,
Right.
but
Okay.
yeah.
So Rob described feeling irritable, and other people have described
Yeah,
feeling irritable.
Yeah, what happens? Yeah, that's when you're it's apprehensive. Might have been what I would use the term, but
Okay.
you don't. Well, if you've ever been motion sick, you don't want to do anything. The last thing in the world you want to do is focus on a task when you're airsick. It's just
That's what
leave
you had
me
to do.
alone. I mean, if anyone's gone out and had too much to drink and they come home and they, you just wait for time to go by. That wasn't as bad as that, but that's almost a feeling like, just let this pass. But it doesn't. It just kept going. The only time it passed is when I left the area. And that's just so discouraging to realize that, yeah, I left, and I'm starting to feel better. And then the gracious, generous family who just visited for 3 days, 2 nights, they're living in the basement because they feel that's where they're safe.
Yeah.
And another strange behavior. What's causing this strange behavior? Where people change their lives entirely. And it's, I know when I was sitting at the table, I wanted to be someplace else. I couldn't do my task. I couldn't do simple things. I didn't want to do something. You look at a screen or read the report, you get about a paragraph into it, and you just go, It must be awful to have your sanctuary changed, because from all the evidence I have, the people I've spoken to, they didn't have this problem until the wind turbines arrived. And you go, is there a linkage?
How long did it take for your symptoms to go away?
I felt better markedly better in 2 days, but it wasn't until a week that I would drop off to sleep and sleep comfortably through the night, that I had a hearty appetite, that I ended up, I felt motivated to do something. And that's another thing that gets me. I could go around and I could mow the lawn, I could do chores like that, but if I sat or I tried to concentrate, I had difficulty. So I get up and do something. Well, so the body, your senses, your ear, your balance, and all that, it's being stimulated. But it associates your movement. Sitting in a chair, having those same senses stimulated, and you're not moving. I don't know. But I'm not a doctor, so I'm an observer.
Yeah.
And I always ask the question, why? What's causing this? And you build relationships. No wind turbine, no problem. Wind turbine is a problem.
Yeah.
Is it acoustic? Is it non-acoustic? That's the question now. I think everyone has been focusing on the acoustic. I think there's a component there that may be non-acoustic that's being missed. So you must be getting quite an earful from all of us you're listening
it's okay.
to. It's a real concern, though. The public should be concerned that these things are becoming everywhere. And I shouldn't say that. It's not everywhere. It seems to be always in quiet places. And one question that gets me, I haven't answered it. I don't know why, but it should be studied. Hull, Massachusetts has 2 wind turbines. One's a small one, out on the point of land by the school. And another one is the entrance to Hull out near the marshes. But there are houses within, or about 1,000 feet away, and there are no complaints. Logan Airport's nearby, but Hull, if it's the same size turbine as Falmouth, not the same type, but it's just the same size, 1.5 megawatt. Are there any complaints there that can be documented? And why aren't there not complaints there and they're here? The only difference is background sound level. It's quiet here. It gets down into the low 20s, 25 maybe, but Hull I expect it to be in the high 40s at night because it's in an urban area. And even louder during the day because they can be under the flight path of returning or departing aircraft. So A lot of
it's
questions
an
need to be
important
answered
question.
or studied.
How, one thing I'm curious about, how did you see other people reacting to helicopter?
Totally different response to helicopter flyovers and aircraft flyovers. Or you mean,
I mean
on-board helicopters?
Yes, on board or close to them during takeoff.
I had no problem. I was ground crew with them, and I flew in them.
And you didn't have any trouble, unless you were looking down, doing your navigation?
Well, unless you get into a bumpy right, where you have these choppy winds, where you feel like you're just going through the air like that.
Okay.
And, you know, you get seasick between a motion, certain amount of motion, about 0.3 of hertz to 3 hertz. And that's the sense of motion. I mean, just think of it, you're on a boat and the waves are going underneath you.
Yeah.
And you're in the trough, and that boat's going to rock as the waves pass underneath you. That motion and that frequency is usually what stimulates
0.3 to 3 hertz.
about 3 hertz motion sickness on that. So you get in a real choppy flight, and it's a teeth chatterer. But I found when I was on boats, it's that slow roll that would get you. And the way I would compensate for it is go up on deck, gulp huge volumes of fresh air, but focus on the horizon.
Yes.
And which now you're basically using your eyes to verify your sense of motion. So they're backing up the ears, giving you a visual. Because I flew one time at night on a cloudless or moonless night, St. Pete, Florida, a lot of boats out at night in the summertime, and we were searching for a missing boat in the dark. And we would be doing a pattern. It's called an expanding, a ladder search. Fly one direction, you move up, and you fly back in the opposite direction. And so you're banking the aircraft. So as a search person, you have your head out the window, you're strapped into a seat, and you have to lean out the window, lean forward in the chair, because the restraints want to pull you back. I was leaning out, and we were doing this for hours, and all of a sudden I said, "Wow, look at all those boats." And the pilot said, "Where?" And I said, "Out the port window." And the pilot went over there and said, "Those aren't boats, those are stars." And I went, "Oh my God." So I quickly went forward. I looked up through the broom closet, or the passageway into the cockpit, and I saw the wet compass and the gyro horizon ball indicator, and it gave me where the horizon was.
Yeah.
Yes, I was leaning forward, looking up.
Wow.
And I thought I was leaning forward, looking down. And because you do that pattern so much, you lose track. But the minute I saw it with the eye, it just corrected it. But it's amazing how the body responds. But this one, with wind turbines, you know, that's vertigo, I guess they call it. It's a form of vertigo. This one doesn't go away. This one does. So the stimulation is still there. And visually, you can't say, "No, I'm wrong." And so you're just sitting there, and your mind is just trying to figure out what's going on. And, you know, when we're uncertain, uneasy, it alters one's sense of well-being.
Yeah.
And I have seen too many people that have been adversely affected health-wise to wind turbines, and I can't associate it with noise. And I just am flummoxed on that. But I think Rob and I are on the track to finding a solution. But motion sickness has not been associated with excessive noise.
Yes.
There's no linkage there. At least
Yeah.
for my, there is one correlation, though, that it's when we had the sick building syndrome back in the late 70s or early 80s, when they were building very tight, very efficient buildings, and the ventilation systems were oversized. They said, "We want to have reserve capacity." Well, what would happen is the fan could not deliver all the air it wanted to. So there was surging. So there's this pulsation in the building on that. And then when they found out that they put them on, had dampers installed to prevent starvation on the fan, the fans would run smooth, and the pulsations went away.
And that would correct the...
That corrected that syndrome. But there were a lot of things that would cause sick building syndrome. There were the adhesives and carpeting and chemicals, but there was one that, the headaches was the pulsations.
If people had headaches with it.
That was one that was the tough one to solve.
And that was related to pulsations in the ventilation system.
Yeah, and I think that same problem would occur in mines. Closed-spaced, captured volume. A well-built house, closed-spaced, captured volume of air. So, on that. So,
okay, great.
It's interesting, and I wish you success with your studies. It's a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
You can see I scratched all my hair off.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for giving me
this
time
today.
on that. Good luck in your
Great.
solution.
Well, I think it's going to come from you.
Thank you. And Rob.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Nina Pierpont with Stephen Ambrose. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.